Imagine this. You're 10 years old. You're in the back seat, driving out to the city. The traffic slowly fading behind you. Kenny Rogers playing on the radio because my dad loved country music. The roads start to change, tar to dust. And somehow, you know you're getting close to something special. What actually makes something a tradition, a family tradition? When does it move away from traditions into just habits and sometimes just activities? I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and in my mind I've been framing it as, what will my children remember? What will they remember about their childhood? What are those things that they will call upon at some point in the future when life's doing its thing and you long to be a child just for a few minutes or a few hours or a few days? Because I certainly go through those moments. And I'm wondering in those moments, what would be the events or the activities or the seasons that they look back to. Some families have traditions. Some families create new traditions without even realizing. And some families lose traditions. And I feel like I'm caught somewhere in between. But I sometimes doubt if what I'm creating or what we're creating as a family has the depth that would last the test of time or last through the next few decades. I'm asking the question of myself, am I creating anything that they can hold on to? Am I giving the inspiration that would make them want to create or carry on certain traditions?
Yeah, no, don't take too long.
No, I'm just buying sandwich.
What do you that?
No problem now. Should be me.
Just record in that video setting. I don't do more than 60 FPS.
Yeah, to be honest, even most of the time, these days I shoot a lot more in like 24, 23.9 basically FPS. When they call us.
Now as a husband and a dad, I now have the responsibility to create new traditions, but it stems from where I get my influence from and a lot of the inspiration from. I think back to my experience growing up and how rest was one of those things that meant a lot to us. So certainly the impact of having us four as a family sort of rested or in a place where we had the opportunity to rest or unplug. But I think, and I focus a lot on my dad because, I frame life a lot, or sometimes through the lens of, am I a good dad by some of these standards, by standards that, he sets. And I know, sometimes that has validity and sometimes it doesn't. You can't get away from that as an only son certainly of a Nigerian man. But what I think about what rest meant to him, he didn't get a lot of that. He was a typical Nigerian dad that was, working really hard to provide for his family, and, had some of the more Nigerian traditional ways of showing love, which wasn't the most expressive, but, came across in how hard they worked to give their families a good life. Well, that came at a cost because he very rarely got to rest, certainly at home. Well, one of the other costs was being home. We didn't get to really see this man or the person that he could be. My dad was an extremely humorous person, like really funny, really smart, But I think just living in a world with so many stresses just meant that he was half the time like on a really short fuse. And I'm pretty confident that's not the man he wanted to be, and clearly that wouldn't have been intentional, but that was not the vision he had for the sort of mood that would generally create in the house. So I think about that, but I also think about the times where we stepped away from home and how he totally transformed into this very different person. He was more relaxed. He was able to go back to this person, the fun person I believe he was when he was much younger. Because for those few days, all of those stresses were paused, lower in priority. But it was just time where in so doing, he was able to be himself with us, spend more time with us, spend time with me. I wanted to be influenced. I'm sure he wanted to influence me as much as possible. I really got to experience my dad when I rested, and that's something that's made me think a lot about who I want to be around my children. I want to be a person who they draw influence from, who they draw inspiration from. And I can only really do that when my best self in front of them and around them. Now, I'm not saying that has to happen just when you're away from home, but being able to unplug certainly aids you along that journey. So we're in a place called Ostenkirk. Every year we do a drive across the border from the UK to somewhere. This time is a small town called Ostenkirk. It's unspectacular, but it's a lovely seaside town that is giving us the opportunity to really connect as a family. We're here with our friends. The location actually feeds into this point. It's critical that we don't come away from this, having focused on other things like, pictures and videos and content. But actually, I want to be able to get home in a couple of days and say, we feel rested and we feel closer as a family.
So growing up in my household, we didn't call them traditions. They're just things that we did. Some were influenced by our faith. Some were influenced by the fact that my mom and dad had different backgrounds and different orientations and family traditions. So we had a mixed bag. But ultimately, if I think about some of the things that happen quite frequently, as Nigerian Christians, at the end of the year, you have watch night service. So that was one, which we always had to do, from 31st of December. Then getting into, one thing we always did when we got home was, as a Pentecostal Christian, we weren't allowed alcohol. So we'd have what we call non-alcoholic wine. And we would have a toast. And these were simple things that we did. Then my dad tried to start this thing as well for a couple of years, and I found them really memorable, where we would go to there's a Sheraton Hotel in Ikeja in Nigeria, and we would go there for breakfast. And actually what I found interesting about that wasn't so much that it was nice to be able to go out with him. We didn't go out as much as a family other than going to visit people. What I found nice about it was that we got to spend time with him. He broadly was relaxed. This was the start of the year. So it was nice to be able to have family time. And I really think that's, in my opinion, what family traditions are around. It should be, a big part of it for me has to be around spending time together. And then we had the infrequent activities, like we would go to see my grandfather every year, or my grandparents every year in Benin, in Edo State. And those things added a little bit of fun to our lives. It would be a 4-hour drive from Lagos, but I still found them really fun. But actually, the things that were really fun, other than just seeing people when we got there, was the process of getting there. I picked a lot of my musical preferences from those sorts of trips, where I would listen to certain songs over time. My dad had a wide variety of music that he listened to, and so was my mom, or so did my mom. It was circular and non-circular music, but they had their own preferences. And I think all of these things added life to it. And actually there's a point when you're exiting Lagos where they're like street hawkers, and we would get a couple of things from there. And even those things is like just doing it as a family was like really interesting. So for me, I think I reflect on these things, and although they weren't intended as those obvious traditions or called that, they clearly were, in my mind, building up to be a view around what shaped my childhood or those middle years.
Let's get this cycle. Yeah.
That being said, Bruges is meant to be. Just 40 miles from Austin Kirk, Bruges is exactly what you imagine it to be. Cobbled stone streets, tourists waving from the boats as they pass through. Carefully preserved history. And maybe that's the point. It all feels so familiar, like you've seen it before, even if you haven't. And I don't mean this in a bad way. It's easy to take it. But standing there on the day, I realized I don't make videos about places. At least not in the traditional sense of what we know to be travel content or travel information. That is not what I do well. That's not my strength. My entire reason for creating this series of videos, or certainly this channel, was to understand as I navigated my life experiences and as I navigated new places or new spaces, how I drew inspiration from them, how I drew parallels with the seasons of life that I was going through, and how I stayed creative doing that. That is the intention, and will always be the intention. Coming to a place like Austin Kirk certainly does sit quite nicely with the intention for the channel, which is not the glamorous or flamboyant locations, but a place that's able to help drive new meaning to theories or principles I've long wanted to dive a little deeply into. There's a long history of fishermen here in Austin Kirk. I found it genuinely astonishing seeing the unique nature of the shrimp fishermen they have here. They're distinct, they're clad in yellow, and it's a big traditional event here. It's seasonal, and essentially we're missing out by literally a couple of hours because we leave the morning of the start of the new season. But I looked it up, and there is a lot of memorabilia around. Even this house that we're in, the Airbnb we're in, does have loads of it. But it tells you how big a tradition it is here. And it makes you think and raises questions around what it takes to keep traditions going. This is a tradition that has been part of the local community for over 500 years, which is a long time to keep it going. It's now a UNESCO recognized activity in this area. But fundamentally, it would have gained that level of recognition based on that continuity that had been built over time. And the point here for me is traditions are built and maintained through intentionality. Someone chose to keep this going. There would have been difficult times. There would have been times where it didn't feel convenient, but they had a greater goal, which was to maintain the tradition. If I think about how that fits in with me personally, I might not be replicating the exact same tradition in the way it was done or it was handed down to me, but I certainly value a lot of the memories and the activities that have stuck with me over the years and have informed the sort of traditions that I choose to build for my family.
I don't think I've framed something on the side, right? Well, Oh, nothing like no, I said I'm friends. Okay.
But what's eating away at traditions today? We're together, but not always present. So time spent in the same place doesn't always equate to closeness. Our phones are the other thing now that take so much of our time compared to certainly when I was growing up. And there's the fact that certainly growing up, work was a thing that was done and achieved away from home. Now, certainly since COVID, we have the spaces mixed up between work and home, and the lines are blurred. So we're never truly present, even when we're there. Sometimes I feel like I'm recording but not really experiencing things. It's just a reflection of how different things are now, and it's a wake-up call for me to appreciate these years because they won't always be the same. So then there's a question, what will they do? Will they recreate what we had? Will they choose to see that as inspiration, or will they go a totally different direction? Maybe traditions are this big, massive thing that I am over-egging or overthinking. Maybe it's just things we do over and over and over again with care. They're habits we build. It doesn't have to be grand gestures. And in many ways, being in Austin Kirk over the last few days has magnified that view in my mind. Simple works, simple traditions that create memories still count for something. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what they'll remember. And maybe that, for them, is where it starts.